everyone. Welcome back to Through the Bible here at Hilltop Church. Last time we were together, we looked at the book of Jeremiah. We looked at the prophet Jeremiah, known as the weeping prophet. Tonight we're going into the book of Lamentations, also written by the prophet Jeremiah. And we know last time when we were in the book of Jeremiah that Jeremiah was a prophet from the 13th year of King Josiah, 626 BC, all the way through the siege and the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. And then a short time afterwards when Jeremiah went with the remnant that remained to Egypt, where presumably he and the remnant died there in Egypt. Now think about this. Jeremiah is a prophet during this 2-year siege on Jerusalem, right? Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians have come in to take Jerusalem out. It's a 2-year siege that happens. Now, in the past, we talked about fortified cities. Remember, Jerusalem is a fortified city. We talked about fortified cities and what they look like and how they protect the inhabitants within from the enemies outside. Right? You have this big, huge, thick wall that's 30 to 40 feet high. You have these heavy gates that are there, right? The walls surround the entire city, and then you have these huge, heavy gates that shut everyone out. Right? If an enemy comes in to attack, an enemy comes in to conquer it, then all you do is shut the gates. You bar those gates, and you put soldiers, you put archers up on top of those walls to protect the city. And a siege is really the best way to take a fortified city during this time. Remember, there is no aerial attack, right? You don't have jet airplanes flying over top dropping bombs. And so a siege is really the best method, right? If you can't get through those gates, what do? What happens is the archers are up there. As the enemy tries to approach that city, the archers start picking them off one by one as soon as they start approaching. And then if they get close enough to the walls, remember, you can only get through by tearing down that gate or going through the walls. But as soon as you get close enough to that, then they're dumping hot buckets of oil on you. They're dropping rocks, big boulders on top of your head. And so it's a very difficult thing to take a fortified city. So really, the only way to take a city like this is through a prolonged siege. It's the only practical way. Why? Because as you are inside the city and you're locking yourself in, and you're locking, right, as the enemy's trying to come in, you're locking the enemy out from coming in, but you're also locked, unable to leave that city, right? You are locked into that city. And so all the enemy has to do is simply come and set up a perimeter around the entire city, bar anyone from coming out. And then the siege, especially if you don't have drinkable water, that siege will be over really quickly within a number of days, right? If the enemy can find the fresh water source that comes into the city, all they have to do is poison that fresh water source by putting some animal dung in it. And within a week, you are surrendering or you are dying because you can't survive very long without water. Now think about Jerusalem, how Jerusalem set up. Remember, 100 years beforehand, 701 BC, King Hezekiah is king, and he is worried from an attack from the Assyrians and Sennacherib. If you remember the story, the Assyrians have come in to attack Jerusalem. They have 185,000 troops around the city walls. It looks like Jerusalem is going to fall. There's nothing else to do. Now, many of us know the story. The death angel came in and killed 185,000 Assyrian troops. Sennacherib goes back home with his tail between his legs. But before that, Hezekiah was fearful of being attacked. So Hezekiah dug a tunnel from the Shalom pool, where is the fresh water source inside Jerusalem. That fresh water source gets its water from the Gihon Valley, or springs. And so what Hezekiah did, Hezekiah dug a tunnel. It's called Hezekiah's tunnel from that pool all the way out to springs. It was a hidden tunnel, and the Babylonians could not find it. Matter of fact, today you can still go to Jerusalem, and if you go certain times a year, you can take a tour of that tunnel. You can actually walk through that tunnel. Water still flows through it to this day. At certain times of year, it's only about 6 inches to a foot high. Other times of year, it'll go up to your neck, and it's probably not wise to go through it. But you can still go through that tunnel today. It was a very hidden tunnel. And even back then, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar could not find that tunnel. And so what should have been a week to basically keep them from not having drinkable water ended up being a 2-year siege. Because if you can't find the water source, then the only option is to lock the gates, force no one to come out, and eventually starvation sets in and you starve the people. So this siege went on for 2 years, right? It's a horrible thing that takes place here in Lamentations, right? This 2-year siege where nothing goes in and nothing comes out. Think about this. After a while, all the shelves in the grocery stores, they are running empty, right? Not only are they running out of toilet paper, they are running out of everything. Soon, people begin to starve. Soon, morale plummets within the entire city, right? It is a very fearful thing to go through, right? And it's an awful thing that takes place here, this 2-year siege on Jerusalem. Now, remember way back when we were in the book of Deuteronomy, God made this promise in Deuteronomy 28. He says this to the Israelites. He said, if you will fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. And then God goes on and tells them all the blessings. But then in verse 15, God says this to the Israelites. He says, however, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow his commands and decrees I've given you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. And then God lists all these terrible curses that will come on them if they don't obey them. Now remember, when Deuteronomy is written, it is 1406 BC, right? The Israelites are on the shores of the Jordan River, getting ready to go into the promised land, getting ready to take Jericho and this entire promised land. Moses is retelling their story, their history to this new generations. But think about this. This is 800 years before the events that are getting ready to take place here with Jerusalem and the Babylonians and Jeremiah. 800 years before. But listen to what God said way back then. Listen to these series of catastrophic events that are going to take place. God said, if you do not obey me, this is what will happen. It says the Lord, Deuteronomy 28 verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand, a fierce looking nation without respect for the old or pity for the young. They will devour the young of your livestock and the crops of your land until you are destroyed. They will leave you no grain, new wine, or olive oil, nor any calves of your herds or lambs of your flocks until you are ruined. They will lay siege to all of the cities around your land until the high fortified walls in which you trust fall down. They will besiege all the cities throughout the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now, pay very close attention to this, because this statement that God made 800 years beforehand is now coming to pass. Verse 53. It says, because of the suffering your enemy will inflict on you during the siege, you will eat the fruit of the womb, the flesh of the sons and daughters the Lord your God has given you. Even the most gentle and sensitive man among you will have no compassion on his own brother or the wife he loves or his surviving children. And he will not give to one of them any of the flesh of his children that he is eating. Right? The people in this city are turning to cannibalism. This is a terrible thing that is happening. And it will be all he has left because of the suffering your enemy will inflict on you during the siege of all your cities. In fact, verse 56, the most gentle and sensitive woman among you, so sensitive and gentle that she will not venture to touch the ground with the soles of her foot, will begrudge the husband she loves and her own son or daughter, and the afterbirth from her womb and the children she bears. For in her dire need, listen to this, she intends to eat them secretly. Wow. Because of the suffering your enemy will inflict on you during the siege of your cities. Right? This is horror far beyond you could ever imagine. This is a terrible thing that has taken place. This 2-year siege on Jerusalem. Now remember the prophet Jeremiah, right? He has been confined to the courtyard of the guard in the center of the city of Jerusalem. And for 2 years, the siege goes on, and Jeremiah is an eyewitness to everything that is happening, to all of these events. Think about this. This is why God told Jeremiah, you are not to marry. Why? Because Jeremiah, I don't want to see you going through the suffering of losing your wife and losing your children and all the horrible things that are going to happen. And so Jeremiah, do not marry. It's terrible. Jeremiah is an eyewitness to these events. And Jeremiah writes Lamentations as an eyewitness to the events that are taking place here in Jerusalem. Now let's get into Lamentations. Lamentations is 5 chapters long. And each chapter is a poem. More specifically, each chapter is an acrostic poem. And even more specific than that, it is an alphabetic acrostic poem. That means that the first word of each line begins with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, or in sequential order, begins with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so the first word of the first verse begins with the Hebrew word Aleph. The second verse begins with Bet. And so you have Aleph, Bet, A-B, right? That's where we get the word alphabet from, Aleph, B. And it goes all the way down through all 22 verses in chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5, right? The Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. There's 22 verses in chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5. Each verse beginning with a successive letter within the Hebrew alphabet. Now, the third chapter is 66 verses long. It is a triple acrostic poem. Right? And so you have Aleph, 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 Bet, 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 and so on down the line. It is a triple acrostic. And so chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5, 22 verses. Chapter 3, 66 verses. Now the question is, and the question we have to ask is, why did Jeremiah constrain himself to this type of writing, this acrostic poem? Right? It is very artful, but it's also very artificial, and it's very difficult to write in this style. Right? We see it sometimes in the Psalms. The psalmist will write in this acrostic style also. But why would Jeremiah confine himself to writing in this style? Why would he place this kind of controlling mechanism on himself? Well, think about this, right? In Lamentations, here's Jeremiah. He is an eyewitness to all of these terrible events that are happening, right? He's giving this account of this 2-year siege on Jerusalem. And he's seeing all the afflictions that are happening, right? And these inflictions lend themselves to just an overwhelming outpouring of emotions. And so think about this. You need this poem, you need this structure, you need these constraints to help keep you in line. And so that way your writing is just not an outpouring of emotions. It's enough of that also, but you need something to constrain that. And so you just don't blubber on just going about. And so you need this poem, right? You need to be artful. You need this careful fashioning that to enhance the writing and also to constrain it. Now, think about Lamentations, right? It's this alphabetic acrostic, right? Forces control on the poetry and enhances and amplifies the effects of the poem. And so we have, like I said, poems 1, 2, 4, and 5, 22 verses. Poem 3, the third chapter, 66 verses, right? And it's the center unit of the entire book, right? It centers the entire book. Very carefully written, very deliberately done. And so now let's picture the scene. Here is Jeremiah, right? This 2-year siege has been going on. He is in the center of the city. It's drug on for almost 2 years now, and now we are in the final stages of this 2-year siege. Winter has set in. The Babylonians, remember, they take the city. The city falls on August 14th, 586 BC. And so now, figure the time right now is January, February. It is the rainy season in Jerusalem. And here's Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is looking around. The rain has been coming down steadily for 2-3 days a week now, right? Puddles are forming on the ground. It is pouring down rain. The city itself is soaked. You can see rain dripping from the rooftops, rain coming down the walls of Jerusalem, coming down the walls of the houses. Jeremiah is there, and he's going for a walk, and he's looking down the alleys, and he's looking at the houses, and he sees the rain coming down, and he sees the rain dripping on the walls of Jerusalem. And Jeremiah imagines himself that the city itself is crying, that the city itself is weeping. And Jeremiah says this in Lamentations chapter 1, verse 1. Excuse me. He says, "How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night, tears on her cheeks," right? With rainwater dripping down the houses. Imagine that, right? Bitterly she weeps at night, tears are on her cheeks. Among all of her lovers, there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her. They have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone in exile. She dwells among the nations, but she finds no resting place. Remember, Judah and Jerusalem, they have been attacked in 605 BC. Captives have been taken back to Babylon. Daniel was among them. And then they were attacked again in 597 BC. More captives have been taken. Ezekiel, the prophet, was among them. And so she dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. Verse 4, "The road to Zion mourns, for no one comes to her appointed festivals." Right? No pilgrims are coming for the three appointed festivals, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. These three appointed times where the people would flood the cities to worship God, come to the temple and worship God. None of that is happening. All her gateways are desolate. Her priests groan. Her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. Think about this. The Babylonians, they are camped outside the walls, and they're just having a merry old time while they are there. There is no fighting. They are simply waiting outside for the inevitable to happen. From inside Jerusalem, you can hear the soldiers outside laughing. You can hear the music playing. You can hear the songs being sung. You can see the people drinking and eating. You can smell the food cooking and the meat roasting as you sit inside this city wall starving. Jeremiah says, "The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone in exile, captives before the foes. All the splendor has departed from daughter Zion, and her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before the pursuers. In the days of her affliction and wandering, Jerusalem remembers all the treasures that were hers in the days of old. When her people fell into enemies' hands, there was no one to help her. Her enemies looked at her and laughed at her destruction. Jerusalem has sinned greatly, and so has become unclean. All who honor her despise her, for they have all seen her naked. She herself groans and turns away. Her filthiness clung to her skirts. She did not consider her futures. Her fall was astounding. There was none to comfort her. Right? Jerusalem is being personified here as a weeping woman, as a crying lady. And Jerusalem says, this crying lady, Jerusalem represented by this crying lady says, "Look, Lord, at my afflictions, for the enemy has triumphed." And then Jeremiah says, "The enemy laid hands on all her treasures. She saw pagan nations enter her sanctuary, those you have forbidden to enter your assembly. All her people groan as they search for bread, and they barter their treasures for food to keep themselves alive." And then Jerusalem, once again personified as this weeping woman, cries out, "Look, Lord, and consider, for I am despised. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the days of his fierce anger? From on high he sent fire, sent it down into my bones. He spread a net for my feet and turned me back. He made me desolate, faint on all the day long. My sins have been bound into a yoke. By his hands they were woven together. They have been hung on my neck, and the Lord has sapped my strength. He has given me into the hands of those I cannot withstand. The Lord has rejected all the warriors in my midst, and he has summoned an army against me to crush my young man. In his winepress the Lord has trampled virgin daughter Judah. Verse 16, this is why I weep and my eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed. Then verse 17, Jeremiah speaks up and continues. He says, Zion stretches out her hands because there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has decreed for Jacob that his neighbors become his foes. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. Then Jerusalem, once again personified as this woman, says, the Lord is righteous, yet I rebelled against his command. Listen, all you people, look for my suffering. My young men and young women have gone in exile. I call to my allies, but they betray me. My priests and my elders perish in the cities while they search for food to keep themselves alive. See, Lord, how distressed I am. I am tormented within, and in my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves, inside there is only starvation and death. Verse 21, people have heard my groanings, but there is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my distress, and they rejoice at what you have done. May you bring the day you have announced, so that they may become like me. Let all their wickedness come before you. Deal with them as you dealt with me. Because of all my sins, my groans are many, says Jerusalem, and my heart is faint. Right? This is a great lament. Right? It's an acrostic poem, right? Very controlled poetry with Jeremiah speaking, envisioning Jerusalem as this weeping woman, and then allowing Jerusalem to speak for itself as well. This is an amazing yet utterly depressing literature.